Imagine a young woman, just 20 years old, full of dreams, traveling to another continent to study and experience life. Now, imagine that same young woman at the center of one of the most controversial and media-driven trials in recent history, accused of taking part in the brutal murder of her roommate. This is the story of Amanda Knox, a name that became synonymous with mystery, doubt, and worldwide division. In 2007, the Italian city of Perugia became the stage of crime that not only destroyed a life, but also unleashed a storm of headlines, theories, accusations, and trials that captured the attention of millions around the globe. To some, Amanda was just an innocent American student, unfairly used as a scapegoat. To others, she hid a dark side, capable of manipulating and lying her way out of the truth. And that's the lingering question that remains to this day. Was Amanda Knox a victim of the Italian justice system and media hysteria, or a monster who managed to escape her guilt? Before we dive into the details of this fascinating and disturbing case, here's an invitation. If you enjoy exploring real stories that defy logic, divide opinions, and reveal how thin the line between innocence and guilt can be, make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave a like. It helps bring even more impactful stories like this one. Get ready, because what you're about to hear is not just a reconstruction of crime, but a journey through the investigation's backstage, the justice system's flaws and triumphs, and above all, the human contradictions that turn Amanda Knox into one of the greatest criminal enigmas of the 21st century. It was November 1st, 2007, a national holiday in Italy. In Perugia, a small and charming university town, the quiet atmosphere was shattered by a scene that would soon become an international nightmare. Meredith Kercher, a 21-year-old British student, was found dead in the bedroom of the house she shared with other students. The crime scene was brutal. Meredith's body was discovered partially covered with duvet, showing clear signs of violence and resistance. The bedroom door was locked on the inside, and police had to break it down to enter. The shock was immediate. A foreign student murder inside her own home, in a town once known for its youthful, bohemian vibe. The first questions quickly surfaced. Who could have committed such violence? Were there signs of forced entry? Was the crime linked to a burglary, a ritual, or a personal dispute? The Italian media quickly turned the case into a headline frenzy, feeding speculation that soon crossed borders. Meredith was described by friends and family as a sweet, responsible young woman dedicated to her studies. Her brutal death clashed with the calm and positive image she had among classmates and professors. She was a victim who instantly drew empathy, making the search for answers even more urgent. And this is where Amanda Knox, Meredith's roommate, first stepped into the spotlight. Her behavior the day after the crime caught the attention of investigators. Reports described laughter, kisses with her boyfriend, and an apparent lack of grief. These details, though subjective, planted the seed of suspicion. What initially seemed like an isolated tragedy quickly took on the shape of a mystery. The press began portraying Perugia not as a peaceful university town, but as a stage of a dark thriller, where a web of sex, drug, and hidden secrets could have led to a bloody ending. From that moment on, the investigation would evolve into a global spectacle, turning Amanda Knox, Rafael Salicito, and even outsiders into protagonists of a narrative that mixed facts, rumors, and speculation, one that still divides opinions to this day. As the investigation moved forward, the police's attention quickly turned to someone who initially seemed unlikely, Amanda Knox, the American roommate. What raised suspicions was not only the circumstances of the crime, but also Amanda's behavior in the days that followed. To many, she did not react as one would expect from someone who had just lost a friend under such violent conditions. Reports describe Amanda as distant, smiling at inappropriate moments, even exchanging affection with her boyfriend Rafael Salicito in front of the media and investigators. These details, however subjective, became fuel for suspicion. Moreover, Amanda's early statements to the police raised even more doubts. She contradicted herself on crucial points, failed to recall simple details, and even falsely accused Patrick Lumumba, the owner of a bar where she worked, of being involved in the crime. She later admitted that this statement had been forced during a long interrogation, but the damage was already done. Amanda's credibility was in ruins. The press embraced this narrative with intensity. Headlines branded her as Foxy Knoxy, a nickname that combined her youthful, charismatic appearance with supposed dangerous sensuality. The media did not portray her merely as a suspect, but as a protagonist of a drama filled with insinuations of sex, drugs, and psychological games. On one side, there were those who believed Amanda was an innocent student thrown into the middle of a judicial and media nightmare. On the other, people saw in her a calculated coldness, a disguise of an ordinary girl hiding dark secrets. This polarization only fueled international interest, turning every gesture, every word, and every glance from Amanda into pieces of a puzzle that no one seemed able to solve with clarity. What was at stake was not only the pursuit of justice for Meredith Kercher, but also Amanda Knox's very image. She was no longer seen merely as a witness or the victim's friend. She became a potential murderer in a story that grew more confusing and disturbing with each the investigation into Meredith Kercher's murder quickly turned into unstable ground, marked by haste, technical flaws, and questionable decisions. What should have been a meticulous process guided by solid evidence instead became a spectacle of errors that undermined the credibility of the entire inquiry. The first problems arose at the crime scene. Police and technicians moved in and out of Meredith's room without proper precautions, contaminating traces that could have been crucial. Photos showed investigators without gloves or protective gear, touching objects and shifting elements that should have been preserved. Any expert knows once a crime scene is contaminated, the search for truth becomes almost impossible. Amanda and Raphael were subjected to lengthy interrogations, often without lawyers present and with reports of intense psychological pressure. Amanda, who did not fully master Italian, claimed she had been coerced into signing statements that did not reflect her actual version of events. The false accusation against Patrick Lumumba was born from this very context, exposing how much the investigation relied more on forced confessions than on concrete evidence. Meanwhile, a third figure emerged, Rudy Gide, an Ivorian man with a history of petty crimes, whose DNA was found on Meredith's body. He admitted being in the house on the night of the murder, but his account changed repeatedly, always minimizing his direct involvement. Still, the police seemed more focused on Amanda and Raphael than on Gide, as if the main storyline had already been decided. The so-called evidence against Amanda began to look fragile. A questionable DNA trace on a kitchen knife, inconsistencies in her statements, and subjective interpretations of her behavior formed the core of the accusation. Instead of certainties, the case seemed built on narratives and assumptions. At the same time, the media amplified every detail, turning errors and contradictions into spectacle. The trial was already underway and the headlines long before it reached the courtroom. Amanda was portrayed sometimes as a cruel murderer, sometimes as the victim of a media witch hunt. Amid this confusion, one thing became clear. The investigation was not following a straight path toward truth, but rather a labyrinth of shortcuts, flaws, and contradictions that would forever cast doubt on the legitimacy of everything that followed. In 2009, 2 years after crime, the trial of Amanda Knox and Raphael Sollecito began. The Perugia courthouse was surrounded by cameras, journalists, and onlookers. The atmosphere was that of a spectacle, almost like a reality show broadcast live to the world. The prosecution built its case aggressively. According to them, Amanda, Raphael, and Rudy Gide had been involved in a sort of sexual game that ended in tragedy. This theory, though full of gaps, gained traction thanks to media support and the image the prosecutors worked hard to reinforce. Amanda as manipulative, impulsive, and capable of exerting influence over others. The evidence presented, however, was fragile. A trace of DNA on a knife found in Raphael's home, questionable footprint marks, and psychological interpretations of Amanda's behavior formed the core of the accusation. For the prosecutors, this was enough to sustain the narrative that Amanda was not only present, but played an active role in the murder. The defense, meanwhile, insisted on the investigation's flaws. They highlighted the contamination of the crime scene, the illegal interrogations, and the absence of direct evidence against Amanda. But it was like fighting against a tide already set in motion. Public opinion was divided, and a large portion had already condemned the young American long before the official verdict was read. When the judgment was announced, the court declared Amanda Knox guilty of murder and defamation, sentencing her to 26 years in prison. Raphael received 25 years. Rudy Gide, tried in a separate proceeding, was also convicted, though his role was treated almost as secondary, as if the central story had always been Amanda's. The impact was immediate. For many, justice had prevailed. A foreign student who believed she was above the law would finally pay for what she had done. For others, the trial was nothing more than a theater of errors and prejudice, in which a student was sacrificed to satisfy the need for a culprit. More than just a sentence, Amanda Knox's conviction symbolized a triumph of narrative over evidence. And it was at this moment that the case stopped being merely a criminal process and became a cultural phenomenon, debated in universities, newspapers, and even adapted into films and documentaries. The conviction of Amanda Knox and Rafael Salcido did not bring the case to an end. It was only the beginning of a new chapter filled with twists and revelations. Almost immediately, the defense teams prepared their appeal, determined to dismantle what they argued had been a flawed and biased investigation. During the appeal, the focus shifted toward the integrity of the evidence. Independent forensic experts were brought in to re-examine the DNA samples that had been so crucial in the first trial. Their conclusion was devastating for prosecution. The alleged traces of Amanda's DNA on the kitchen knife were inconclusive, contaminated, and collected under conditions that violated international standards. Similarly, the supposed footprints linking Amanda and Rafael to the crime scene were reclassified as unreliable. Bit by bit, the pillars of the original conviction began to crumble. What had been portrayed as solid forensic evidence was now exposed as weak, circumstantial, and tainted by mishandling. The appeal revealed not just investigative errors, but a judicial process that had been heavily influenced by public pressure and sensationalist headlines. For Amanda, the courtroom became a stage of survival. She spoke of the psychological torment she endured, insisting on her innocence and denouncing the treatment she had received from investigators. Her words, combined with the forensic reevaluations, began to change the narrative. In 2011, the Court of Appeals in Perugia overturned the convictions of Amanda Knox and Rafael Salcido. After 4 years behind bars, Amanda was acquitted of murder charges and finally walked free. The courtroom erupted, some in disbelief, others in relief. For Amanda's supporters, it was a moment of long-awaited justice. For critics, it was the release of a dangerous woman who had simply managed to outplay the system. The acquittal did not close the case. It only deepened the divide. In the United States, Amanda returned home to a mix of sympathy and curiosity, often portrayed as a victim of a foreign justice system gone wrong. In Italy, however, the debate raged on. Many still believed she was guilty, convinced that her release was a result of legal technicalities rather than true exoneration. The appeal had overturned the verdict, but it had not erased the mystery. Instead, it left behind an open wound, a question mark hanging over what really happened in that house in Perugia on the night Meredith Kercher was killed. For most people, Amanda Knox's acquittal in 2011 would have marked the end of the story. But in Italy's complex judicial system, the case was far from over. In a dramatic twist, the Italian Supreme Court ordered retrial, reopening wounds that many believed had already begun to heal. In 2014, Amanda and Rafael once again faced charges of Meredith Kercher's murder. The prosecution returned with renewed determination, reframing arguments and once again spotlighting Amanda's behavior as evidence of guilt. The media frenzy reignited, and the courtroom once more became a stage for global attention. This retrial was not just about facts. It was about perception. Prosecutors leaned heavily on the same elements that had polarized public opinion from the beginning. Amanda's demeanor, her inconsistencies, her so-called lack of appropriate grief. For critics, these were signs of a calculating woman who had escaped justice once before. For defenders, it was proof that the justice system was persecuting her without credible evidence. The tension culminated when the court, in a stunning reversal, declared Amanda and Rafael guilty again. Amanda, safe in the United States at the time, was sentenced in absentia to over 28 years in prison. The verdict shocked many, reopening debates that had simmered for years. Was this justice finally being served, or a miscarriage of justice amplified by pride and pressure within the Italian system? For Amanda, it was another devastating chapter. Though she was no longer behind bars, She lived under the weight of an international conviction, uncertain whether she might be extradited back to Italy. For Raphael, still in Italy, the stigma deepened, his life overshadowed by a case that refused to end. The retrial underscored a haunting reality. In the Knox case, the verdict seemed less about absolute truth and more about the struggle between competing narratives. Each ruling only added new layers of complexity, pushing the case further into the realm of controversy rather than clarity. By 2014, the world had witnessed a cycle of accusation, conviction, acquittal, and reconviction, an endless loop of doubt that made one thing clear. The Amanda Knox case was no longer just a criminal trial. It had become a mirror reflecting flaws in justice systems, biases in media, and the thin line between perception and proof. By 2015, after nearly 8 years of trials, appeals, and reversals, the Amanda Knox case reached its dramatic conclusion. The Italian Supreme Court, in its final ruling, definitively acquitted Amanda Knox and Raphael Solicito of Meredith Kercher's murder. The decision was not just a legal outcome, it was a statement. The court condemned the investigation's errors, highlighting the mishandling of evidence, the reliance on unreliable DNA samples, and the questionable methods used during interrogations. For Amanda, it meant the end of a legal nightmare that had defined her entire adult life. She was free, not only from prison, but from the looming shadow of extradition. Yet freedom did not mean vindication. The court's ruling brought closure on paper, but not in public opinion. For many in Italy and even abroad, doubts persisted. Amanda was acquitted, yes, but was she truly innocent? Or had the system, after years of embarrassment, chosen to wash its hands of a case it could no longer control? Amanda's return to the United States was marked by a paradoxical reality. She was legally cleared, but her name remained permanently tied to one of the most infamous trials of the 21st century. Interviews, documentaries, and books followed, each one revisiting the same haunting question. Was Amanda Knox a victim of a failed justice system, or had she escaped accountability for a crime she helped commit? For Meredith Kercher's family, the final verdict brought little peace. Their daughter's life had been brutally taken, and while Rudy Gede remained convicted, the circumstances of her death were forever clouded by doubt. The endless legal battles had turned Meredith into a secondary character in her own tragedy, overshadowed by the media's fixation on Amanda. The Supreme Court's ruling closed a judicial chapter, but left behind something much larger, a cultural phenomenon that continues to spark debates on justice, media, and truth itself. The Amanda Knox case had ended in law, but in the court of public opinion, it would never truly be over. The Amanda Knox case is more than a story about crime and justice. It is a mirror reflecting how society judges, condemns, and consumes human tragedy. At its core lies a simple but haunting contrast. A young woman traveled abroad in search of dreams and discovery, and instead found herself at the center of one of the most polarizing trials in modern history. The case forces us to confront unsettling questions. How much of Amanda's ordeal was shaped by evidence, and how much was driven by perception, prejudice, and the insatiable hunger of the media? Can behavior, emotion, or even a smile be taken as proof of guilt? And when a justice system allows contamination, contradictions, and pressure from public opinion, can any verdict truly be trusted? For Meredith Kercher's family, justice will never feel complete. A life full of promise was cut short, and no ruling, guilty or acquitted, can ever bring her back. Her memory risks being lost behind the spectacle that turned Amanda Knox into a global figure, while Meredith herself became a name too often overshadowed. For Amanda, freedom came at the price of permanent suspicion. Though acquitted, she continues to live under the shadow of a question that refuses to die. Was she a victim of a flawed system, or did she walk away from a crime the world could never fully prove? And for us, the audience watching from afar, the case leaves a final, uncomfortable truth. Sometimes justice is not about facts, but about the stories we choose to believe. So I ask you, what do you think? Was Amanda Knox an innocent young woman devoured by the machinery of justice and media, or was she hiding a darkness that the courts failed to uncover? The Amanda Knox case reminds us that behind every headline, every trial, and every verdict lies a story that challenges our understanding of truth and justice. And now, I want to hear from you. Do you believe Amanda Knox was a victim of flawed investigation and an unforgiving media circus? Or do you think the courts let a guilty woman walk free? Your perspective matters, and it's through this debate that stories like this continue to resonate. Share your opinion in the comments below. Let's open the discussion, because cases like this are not just about what happened in Perugia. They're about how we, as a society, seek truth in the middle of doubt. And if this video gave you a new perspective, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss the next story. Because sometimes the darkest mysteries are hidden not in the evidence, but in the questions that never get answered.